just back it up. So step 4, but when we're building this velocity team, you have to know who you're bringing into the organization. This morning, we heard a lot around the problem solver and how we have to at times bring in that experience or bring in somebody who has done this before. And a problem solver is broken down in a lot of different areas. And one of the first ways to figure out if somebody's a problem solver or not is get them to identify the dimensions or the stages of a problem. Like when you think about a problem, if you were to break it down into bite-sized chunks, how do you think about it? And just think and listen to if they realize there is a vision, identify, and then let's kind of move into it. We follow the same 4-to-1 model, right? There's 4 areas that we're going to attack our nucleus for our interviewing. In this case, we're using a problem. And the problem, the first of the 4 is seeing. As we're interviewing, can the person see the problem? How did you recognize the problem? Give me an example of where you recognized a problem. And how did you see it? Listen, the things that you're listening for are the primary 2, people or process. I knew this was a problem because culturally we could tell anxiety was rising. Oh, interesting. You know that the person leans into the people side of this. Their awareness of others, for when you look at all the dimensions of EQ, that was high. That's high in this person. They felt it maybe. Again, you're going to ask the questions to quantify it, but moving on, could they measure the problem? How? How'd you measure it? How did you know it was a problem? How'd you know it was a problem is a better question, because then you see if the person jumps right over into measurement or if they just skip over it. But measuring, oh yeah, well, we really knew because we went to the data. Wow, great. So now you know they go to the data. So they're comfortable looking at evidence, which is a good sign. So they didn't just hear somebody and move into, gaslighting, right? They look for evidence. Great. What was the evidence? The evidence was this. The evidence was that. And then you're listening to, logically, it doesn't make sense to you, right? If you're a problem solver, sorry, I should have backed up. If you're interviewing for a problem solver, make sure you are a problem solver that's interviewing, or your peers believe you are. If you're being tagged as the person to interview for the problem, right? I kind of skipped over that point. We're moving into solve. When you're a problem solver, it's not just about solving. Hopefully the first thing you're listening for is I went back and I believed in the measurement. Believing in the measurement is the most important thing to solve. If somebody doesn't believe in the measurement, they can't solve it. The problem, if you launched a new vertical, if you launched this, how was it maintained? If you created a new segmentation, it's not just about creating a new product and helping some salespeople. How'd you maintain it? How'd your delivery people help solve it? How did you solve, how was it solved in the avatar or ideal customer lifecycle, in the journey? So when you're bringing that leader in at the C level, you need to know if they can maintain it or if they understand the concept of maintain. Now, we're not going to beat it to death. You all are going to be able to challenge everybody here shortly, but the one is communicate. In every interview, we want to know if the person can communicate. Were you able to see it? Yeah. So every single one of these stages has the... And then when you saw it, what'd you do next? Right? So we're back up here into C, and we're just going to communicate here for the punchline. I know everybody hasn't been through this process before. You have to communicate at every stage. In every stage. Same as your customer journeys, everything, you have to be able to communicate. So it's, but how did you communicate? If you're this great problem solver, how'd you communicate it when you saw it? Interesting. Carrier pigeons. Sent a raven or crow, I don't know, from our big Game of Thrones conversation yesterday. But measure. When you were measuring, how'd you communicate? Oh, we had a big session. We brought the leaders together and we presented the data. After you asked, communicate at every stage. And what do you think your communication was successful? Yes. How'd you know? Again, back on our 4-in-1 interviewing from a while back, but how? How were you sure? I love that question. All right, solving. When you were solving it, how'd you communicate? A lot of people don't think solving you have to communicate, but solving is one of the most important parts of communicating when you're done measuring. Solving keeps everybody comfortable. Solving can be really fast or it can be really long. If it takes a long time to solve something, you have to be a great communicator. Updating, we're in a line, we're meeting expectations, we're hitting our milestones. This is happening. You have to be able to communicate in that solving stage. If you don't, it creates cultural problems, disruption, but you have to make sure your leaders know how to solve and communicate through that process, so that state. And again, how'd you communicate? A little sneak peek, but we're communicating what success looks like the whole time. That's really important. We are being successful. Here's the reason why. Could you communicate how this is going to be a process we're always going to be on top of? And the process triangle, right? The process triangle that we covered off. A process starts small and then it grows and grows and grows. And as long as there's enough to eat and control when you're building a velocity, the process grows. But as soon as something outside of that triangle comes in from the north, which is usually an outside variable, a recession or a process happens, a recession or a pandemic, or you lose a leader or something like that, sometimes your process gets kicked and it gets changed because people or outside variables change processes, which create problems. And then you need somebody to solve the problem. They'll be able to see it, maintain it, solve it, measure it, but also communicate throughout the whole time. When you're interviewing, you got to be sure that you're comfortable listening to how the person communicates, how they're going to do it. Because if you're bringing them in, you're going to have to be comfortable with their communication style. That's why the one is always 4 and 1 when you interview. Communicate is everything. Do we like the way this person can communicate? Okay. So that's the first part when we're interviewing for a problem. But it's learning the stages, right? And understanding the 4 and 1. Now, how do we really make sure that somebody can do these things? So let's move forward.